Hello everybody, my name is Jared and welcome back to another art video. Today's art video is going to be a continuation of my watercolour portrait themed series. This project is based on my webcomic I Am a Criminal. If you haven't read my webcomic, this webcomic is based on freedom and romance and being true to yourself. It's a big epic journey project. And there's lots of really cute characters, and hopefully you'll think there's cute art. It is an LGBT comic, so there are a lot of LGBT characters in it, and yeah, I hope everyone will enjoy it. If you do want to read it, it is available on Webtoon currently. As of me saying this, I believe there are 8 chapters updated, so once this video is live there should be 8 chapters. So lots of content to catch up on if you're interested. Each chapter is quick and easy to digest, but there's lots of art and lots to look at, and basically I hope you guys will enjoy it. The character in this episode is the character called Shrike. If you've been on my channel for a while, you may recognise that character's name. I have done some art with him before. I did an entire episode of my Developing Characters series on Shrike, and Shrike is the antagonist for the first part of my comic. Shrike is, I'm loath to call him a villain. You will understand that when you get to him in the comic. He is not strictly a villain character, but an antagonist definitely. He has some history with one of the other characters in the comic, and in this artwork I am having to focus very, very heavily on roses and vines. If you have seen any of his development work, you'll see that there's a lot of roses and vines coming up into his character, and that will make sense when he's introduced in the comic. It is all to do with his backstory and some elements to himself as a current character. I'm trying to be very vague about this because I don't want to give too many spoilers. But yeah, Shrike is a really interesting character. He has a bit of a tragic life, and I hope you guys will enjoy him when he comes into the comic. Now, I'm waffling on. What I would normally do with this project is I would do a colour comp thumbnail. So I would do a couple of thumbnails and then I would do coloured versions of the thumbnail I liked the best. But in this one I already had a very vivid idea about what I wanted to do. Shrike was actually the first character that I thought of for doing this watercolour project. So I already knew what I'd kind of like to do. I just did a little thumbnail of like the pose, making sure that I knew where I wanted the roses and kind of stuff like that. And then I did a smaller one where I figured out like his facial expression a little bit, just like that kind of lidded, looking down, avoiding eye contact with the proverbial viewer. And then I went straight into the sketching phase. Now, for the sketching phase, I had a little bit of trouble with the face and the jawline. I have a habit of turning faces the opposite direction than I'm drawing in this one, so I had to sort of reassess what the proportioning of his face was meant to look like. I also was trying to avoid going off model with his facial structure, because Shrike has quite a distinct facial structure, and I was trying to make sure that he actually looked like himself. One of the things about having a webcomic where you have a lot of characters is making sure that everybody looks different but looks themselves. So I sort of have to check myself and make sure everybody's on model quite a lot. The pose that I decided on is this kind of hanging by his hand pose. He's sort of held up against the wall by the roses and vines, and his sort of wrist is entangled inside them. He's also gazing off down to the side away from his arm, and sort of, as I said, avoiding the look at the camera, and yeah, just sort of meant to look uncomfortable and withdrawn. This, particularly out of all of them, probably shows the theme of freedom and entrapment as a little bit more than the other ones do. Some of them are more subtle than others, but this one is very blatant, him feeling trapped by the vines. One of my favourite things to draw is actually roses. That is part of the reason I actually designed Shrike the way that I did. I love drawing roses. I think that they're really fun. You can go into a lot or a little detail and they still look pretty, and they're also really fun to paint, so obviously I had to feature a lot of them in this artwork. Sketching is a really fun phase, but I did struggle with this sketch quite a lot. I had to work back and forth into it, and I feel like I still didn't get the proportions 100% how I like them, but I was really happy with the final result of the piece, so I guess it doesn't matter in the end. I obviously kept a reference for Shrike up while I was working on this. With every single one of my characters, I have a character turnaround and a design board for each of them so that I can keep them all on model. I also have, as you've seen a speed paint for on my channel, a lineup of all of them with their height differences, just purely because I do not want characters' heights like jumping up and down, especially because I do have some characters that are very tall and some characters that are very short. So I do not want it getting ridiculous and people being like, excuse me, this character appears to be like 1 foot tall. This is an issue particularly in a comic that's about D&D, because there are some races that are a lot bigger than other races. Especially with the continuation we're working from, it's obviously very homebrew. We put a lot of our own sort of spin on characters, so some of the races, particularly Aasimar, are really, really tall. Whereas characters like the elves and Rodamel, the rabbit folk, they are very small. So obviously trying to make sure that all of the characters have consistent heights so they don't look too ridiculous when, say, Briar has to interact with Elishan, who is a Aasimar. Inking wise, I stayed by my normal system. I used thicker lines on the edges where the light is hitting them less, and I also used thinner lines on the inside of the character, as well as thinner lines on the sort of creases and edges of things. It's important with line art to try and change your weights, because if you don't, it will probably look kind of janky. Obviously some styles do mean that you can keep consistent line weight. I tend to find with more realistic or more sort of romantic, maybe anime style, it's better to have varied line weight. It makes things have more depth, and it also means that the characters kind of, the sections stand out a little bit better. That's just what I prefer, but obviously you can do what your own style requests. I don't know if I phrased that very well, but basically just do what you feel is suitable to your own art. I think the roses were one of my favourite bit to ink. As I said, I love drawing them, but I like drawing these little like turned up edges of the roses and keeping this line weight all going differently on it. Just really, really fun to draw. I also found drawing his eyes really fun. I actually left them empty in this section because the eyelashes I didn't want to colour in case the ink bled at all with the watercolour, because I knew I'd be using a lot of watercolour. So yeah, I played it safe and did the inking for the eyelashes at the very last point. You'll see that later. Here I'll just go into some like little details about Shrike's character design. He obviously has this dark patch over his eye. Shrike, the character, is based on the bird, the Shrike. If you have heard of those, I imagine you've only heard of them in 2 ways. The most famous Shrikes in, I would say, in popular media are the bird that's keeping itself in the air with sheer anger alone. Yeah, it's a meme, but that's a Shrike. And the song by Hosier. My Shrike is based on the bird, but the song by Hosier is very good, and you should definitely check it out. It's very, very interesting. But Shrikes are known for killing prey by putting them onto the thorns of rose bushes. So yeah, that's kind of where that parallel with rose bushes things comes in, but his character design is also based on the Shrike. So this big black patch that's over his eyes, that is from the Shrike. They have a dark section over their eyes, and well, sometimes, as well as his cloak with these dark tips, and yeah, his colour scheme in general. He's based very heavily on those birds. He's also small because they're quite a small bird. If you see him in size comparison to the other characters, he is one of the shortest male characters in the group. which to be fair isn't saying much. There's a lot of really big races in that friend group. Shrike has a very kind of formal attire. If you look at the other characters' costumes versus him, his is very put together and formal. That will again make sense in the comic, but these are all sort of like intentional design features. Even like the little scales on his top are based on the little downy feathers that are on birds. Yeah, so a lot of the little details of him are very important. For the colouring, I followed my own like usual system. I started very light and worked darker. I tried to keep this one a lot more pastel than the previous art piece. I wanted it to be softer and more romantic and a little bit more moody. I wanted it to have that kind of like Greek tragedy kind of style. I'm very into Greek mythology at the moment, so I'm kind of leaning into that like soft, romantic, very pastel-y, pale colours, roses and flowers and that kind of stuff. I felt like with the pose and the energy of the piece, that made sense. I let some colours come through a little bit brighter than others. Stuff like the bird skull on his shoulder, that was allowed to be a bit brighter. Again, the roses, they were allowed to keep a little bit more vividness. I just really wanted to make sure that the focus of this piece was entirely on him and not on the background. The background particularly stays very, very pastel. As I get further into the details of this, I use a smaller and smaller brush, obviously. I use water brushes for this. It's just a little bit easier for me. I don't like using a cup of water. That sounds so lazy, but I don't. I prefer to have something to wipe my brushes on and water brushes. I do tend to carry a cup of water obviously for stuff like gouache and things like that, because you want to have a better control over how much water you use, but I feel like watercolour, like, as long as I'm watering it down to the correct amount, it'll be fine. Watercolour is one of those medias where I feel competent at it, but not fantastic. Like, I definitely feel like I could improve, and there's a lot of things looking at the actual colouring of this that I wish I'd done a little differently. Particularly his eyes, the painting on there is just a little bit distracting. I think I'd been a bit heavy-handed with that. If I was going to do it again, I would probably do it a lot softer. And I would probably use a harder shading on the skull to make sure it's more obvious that it's gold, not yellow. I wanted to give it more of a shimmer and more of like a dark edge, which I'll probably work on. I'm going to do some studies of metal painting in watercolour just to see how that works. It is one of those things that are quite difficult to capture in watercolour because watercolour is so soft and metal is so hard hard and reflective, do you know what I mean? I also feel like I could have gone even harder on the brightness of the roses instead of having them also being very soft, but then I feel like if I did do that I would have had to put more rendering into his face because otherwise he would have blended into the background, and I definitely don't want that. He is like the main focus of this piece. So yeah, I do really enjoy how this one came out. I'm just still there's elements to it where I'm like, oh, I could probably have tweaked this, but this is why we do artwork, to try and learn things and to improve. Now, while this is technically the last one in the lineup of the watercolour portraits, I will be doing one for Beetle. I never did a speed paint for Beetle's, but his colour scheme has also completely like changed, so I'm going to have to repaint his anyway. So I figured I would record Beetle's new version, and then you can see, and I'll also show the old version so we can see how I've improved or the things that I've changed. Eventually, once I get a little bit further into the comic as well, I may also do a watercolour portrait for Haven. If you again have been following my process on this, Haven is another character in the D&D project that he's not strictly in the main group, so I didn't want to include him in this setup, but he is also a character that I like, and he is also a bit of a fan favourite. A lot of people who have been following my process on TikTok and things like that love him. They think he's got really cool designs, so I probably will do one for him, but I would, for his one, probably do a little bit of mixed media, because he has a lot of gold on his design, and it would be nice to try and do that with maybe some gold paint or gold leaf. We shall see. But yeah, all in all, I'm really happy with this one. I'm really happy with how it came out. I used a tiny bit of gouache at the end to add a little bit of white highlight to his eyes, because he's got very dark eyes. And yeah, I really like how it came out. It's a really pretty design. I feel like it came out probably the best of all of the ones that I've done. His and Aloy's are very, very high up on that. I love how both of those came out. Rodamel's is also pretty fun though. I do like all those little books in the background. Once I have finished Bator's, I will do a little flip through where I talk about each of them individually and together, and yeah, I will just do a video of basically me reacting to my own finished artwork. I hope you guys will like it. I hope you guys will like it anyway. So yeah, thank you very, very much for watching, and as always, please remember to be creepy. And go read my webcomic. The link will be in the description below. It is called I Am a Criminal, and it is on Webtoon.